The Norcadian bastards had no idea what they started when they attacked Earth. When Alexander Simmons got the distress call, his blood turned to ice in his veins. The ruthless aliens had ravaged humanity's homeworld in a surprise assault, decimating major cities and defensive installations. With Earth's forces crippled and scattered, the future of the human race itself teetered on a razor's edge. "Those Norcadian fucks," Alexander growled, slamming a fist against the console of his scout ship. He was out near the Norcadian border on a solo recon mission when the desperate message reached him. Now, he might be one of the only humans left with a working spacecraft and weapons. Alexander punched in coordinates, already pushing his ship to redline as he rocketed back towards Earth. Humanity needed every able body it had left. On the way, he passed the shattered, drifting hulks of human ships the Norcadians had destroyed, grim evidence of their brutality. But Alexander refused to surrender, to consign humanity to oblivion without a fight. On encrypted channels, he reached out to other human survivors, other ships and outposts that had escaped the carnage. Many had already given up, but Alexander cobbled together a ragtag band of pilots, soldiers, and engineers still willing to resist. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Galen, the cruel Norcadian commander behind the Earth attack, intercepted Alexander's communications. He dispatched kill teams to hunt down this brazen human and his pitiful resistance movement before they could mount any real challenge. Narrowly evading the initial assault, Alexander led his scrappy militia to a secret base he established in the asteroid belt. There they regrouped, salvaging and modifying ships, analyzing Norcadian tech to develop countermeasures. Several of Alexander's new allies didn't survive those deadly skirmishes with Galen's kill squads, but for each human that fell, Alexander's resolve only hardened. Then came the gut punch. Intelligence reports revealed the Norcadians were readying their forces for a final offensive to erase the last human holdouts and terminate the species once and for all. Alexander and his soldiers now worked at a breakneck pace, pushing themselves past exhaustion to build a strike force that could take the fight to the enemy, disrupt their genocidal campaign before the killing blow fell. As Alexander prepped for a series of desperate raids on the Norcadian fleet, a message from Galen appeared on his screen. The alien commander gloated over the superiority of Norcadian might, the futility of human defiance. "Enjoy your final days, human. Your species' time is nearly at an end," Galen sneered. White-hot rage surged through Alexander's body, tempered into a cold, deadly focus. Humanity was on its knees, but it wasn't finished yet. As long as one human still drew breath, the fight would go on. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the existence of human civilization itself. Alexander gathered his forces, a fire blazing in his eyes as he addressed them. "The Norcadian invaders want to wipe us out, to consign humanity to the dust of history. They think they've beaten us, but they're about to learn the depths of human defiance, the price of human vengeance. We'll show them what it really means to attack Earth." A chorus of grim cheers greeted his words. Failure here was not an option. Too much rode on their actions. These soldiers would fight to their last breath and heartbeat. With furious determination, Alexander and his forces armed their weapons and fired up their engines. The Norcadians wanted a final assault. They were about to get it. The aliens would soon learn the terrible cost of daring to attack humanity's home. If Earth was to fall, it would not go quietly. It was time to make the Norcadian invaders regret they ever set foot on human soil. Alexander wasted no time putting his newfound strategies into action. His forces struck like lightning, hitting Norcadian supply depots and outposts with devastating efficiency. They'd emerge from the void of space, unleashing a barrage of weapons fire and missiles before the enemy could react. By the time Norcadian reinforcements arrived, Alexander's ships were long gone, leaving only smoldering ruins behind. These guerrilla raids were made possible by the Norcadian tech. Alexander's engineers had reverse-engineered. Salvaged stealth systems allowed human ships to slip past enemy sensors undetected. Captured Norcadian weaponry packed a punch their older human designs couldn't match. Alexander's soldiers relished turning the aliens' own tools against them. News of these victories spread like wildfire through the human resistance network. Survivors who had given up hope now flocked to Alexander's banner, eager to join the fight. His once ragtag fleet soon swelled with new ships and personnel, giving them the strength to take on larger targets. But their success came at a price. An enraged Galen began executing human prisoners in retaliation, broadcasting their deaths across human comm frequencies. Alexander gritted his teeth as he watched innocent civilians butchered before his eyes, their only crime being the same species as him. Galen was trying to break him, to shatter his willpower with these atrocities. It had the opposite effect. Alexander matched Galen's savagery with boldness, launching even more audacious attacks. The crown jewel was an ambush on a Norcadian destroyer, the first time the resistance had taken out such a massive warship. A swarm of human fighters and bombers, jury-rigged with Norcadian tech, caught the destroyer by surprise as it passed through an asteroid field. They overwhelmed its defenses and crippled its engines with well-placed shots, leaving it helpless. Then a volley of breaching pods punctured its hull, disgorging squads of human commandos to mop up the crew in brutal close-quarters combat. By the time Alexander gave the order to withdraw, the once mighty destroyer was a drifting wreck. As Alexander gunned his fighter through the expanding fireball of the exploding destroyer, elation surged through his blood. Against impossible odds, they'd secured their first major space victory. This would show the Norcadians that humans were still a force to be reckoned with. Marcus's transmission cut off in a burst of static. Scanning his tactical display, Alexander spotted Marcus's crippled fighter drifting away from the battle zone, leaking atmosphere. Norcadian boarding craft were already zeroing in on it like vultures. As Marcus's stricken ship grew larger in his view screen, Alexander watched in horror as a Norcadian boarding shuttle latched onto the fighter's hull. Armored Norcadian troops began cutting their way inside, even as Alexander opened fire. His shots pounded the shuttle, breaching its hull, but it was too late. The Norcadians had already dragged Marcus from his cockpit, pulling him inside their craft. Alexander screamed in helpless rage as the shuttle peeled away from Marcus's empty fighter, vanishing into the chaos of battle. He was about to give chase when the urgent calls of his squadron mates penetrated the fog of his anguish. "Alexander, we have to go. Galen's ships are closing in. If we don't leave now, none of us will make it out." Every fiber of his being urged him to go after Marcus, but Alexander knew his friend would never forgive him if he got the rest of their comrades killed in a futile rescue attempt. With a strangled curse, he wrenched his fighter around and fired his afterburners, blasting clear of the combat zone with the surviving human ships. As they fled, Alexander pored over the comm chatter they intercepted from the Norcadian channels. Amidst the noise, he picked out references to a secret Norcadian research installation where high-value prisoners were brought for interrogation. The implications of what they would do to Marcus there filled Alexander with dread. He knew all too well the brutal experiments the Norcadians conducted on human captives. Alexander smacked his fist against his cockpit canopy, the pain barely registering. He'd left Marcus behind once. He wouldn't do it again. At any expense, he'd find that Norcadian prison and bring his friend back. As soon as he landed, Alexander grabbed the nearest Special Forces squad he could find. "Gather your gear and your best men," he ordered. "We're going after Marcus. I don't care if we have to shoot our way through every Norcadian between here and that base. We're not leaving him in their hands." Some might have called it a suicide mission. The prison was deep in Norcadian space, guarded by their strongest ships and troops, but Alexander didn't hesitate. Yes, it was risky, but he'd let Marcus down once already. Never again. While the commando team assembled, Alexander pored over every scrap of intel they had on Norcadian defenses, searching for the slightest vulnerability to exploit. Finally, he found a tiny chink in their armor, a regular supply transport that ferried goods and personnel to the prison base. If they could stow away on that ship, they might just be able to slip past the base's formidable security. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. Kitted up and armed to the teeth, Alexander and his team infiltrated the Norcadian logistics depot, handling the supply transport. They managed to sneak aboard the vessel moments before it blasted off, tucking themselves away amongst the cargo containers. The journey to the base was nerve-wracking, every moment fraught with the risk of discovery, but luck for once was on their side. They managed to reach the prison without raising any alarms. That changed the moment they slipped out of the transport and set foot on the base itself. Almost immediately they were spotted by a patrol of Norcadian guards. The base's cramped metal corridors erupted in a hail of weapons fire as Alexander and his men fought their way deeper into the facility. Every step was bought with blood and bullets as they clashed with the Norcadian defenders. The aliens were tenacious and well-equipped, but they were no match for the fury and grit that drove Alexander forward. His rifle blazed as he cut down foe after foe, the staccato of gunfire echoing through the passageways. Finally, they reached the detention block. They blasted their way inside, frantically searching the cells for any sign of Marcus. At last, Alexander caught a glimpse of a familiar face. His heart clenched. Marcus was there, strapped to an operating table, his body broken and bloodied by torture. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, his skin pale. He was alive, but only barely. Alexander rushed to his side, quickly severing the shackles that bound him. "Marcus, Marcus, can you hear me?" "Of course I did. I'd never leave you behind. Now let's get you out of here." Supporting Marcus between them, Alexander and his team began to backtrack towards their stolen supply ship. But as they approached the hangar, warning klaxons began to blare. Blast doors started slamming shut around them, cutting off their escape routes. Over the loudspeakers, a cold Norcadian voice crackled, "Did you really think your clumsy rescue attempt would go unnoticed, humans? You've only doomed yourselves alongside your pitiful friend." Gritting his teeth, Alexander pulled Marcus behind a bulkhead for cover as Norcadian troops flooded into the room, weapons raised. They were cut off with no way out. This was supposed to be a quick extraction, not a suicide mission. But the Norcadians had them cornered like rats in a trap. And that's when the world shook. Tremors rocked the base, accompanied by the bone-rattling thud of high-yield explosives. The Norcadian troops surrounding Alexander looked around in confusion as smoke began to pour in from the air vents. In the chaos of the sudden attack, Alexander spotted an unexpected opening. Whatever rebels were assaulting the base had caused enough disruption to the hangar doors that they hadn't fully closed. There was a gap, just wide enough for a ship to slip through if its pilot was skilled or desperate enough. Alexander was both. Go, to the ship, it's our only chance." Hauling a semi-conscious Marcus behind him, Alexander led the mad dash aboard the waiting transport. His commandos piled in behind him, laying down covering fire to keep the confused and distracted Norcadians at bay. Alexander dumped Marcus into the co-pilot's chair as he slid behind the controls. The ship hummed to life beneath his fingers, engines flaring. With a shuddering jolt, Alexander launched them towards that narrow seam between the hangar doors. Weapons fire pinged off their rear deflector screens as the Norcadians belatedly opened fire. The gap loomed before them, far too small for any sane pilot to attempt. Alexander didn't hesitate. He aimed their prow straight for that slender patch of starlight and gunned the sublights. Collision alarms wailed as they shot through the gap, the belly of the ship scraping the edges of the doors with a shower of sparks. And then they were clear, rocketing away from the besieged station into open space. The scene that greeted them outside the base was one of total bedlam. Flights of rebel ships swooped and dueled with the Norcadian picket fleet, energy beams crisscrossing the void. The comm waves were total chaos, as both sides threw out conflicting orders. The attacking rebels seemed to have little interest in Alexander's stolen ship, regarding it as just another Norcadian transport fleeing the battle. Alexander took full advantage of that disinterest. Weaving through the anarchic fray erupting around them, he gunned the ship's engines and set a course for the nearest human outpost. Only once they were well clear of the engagement zone did he allow himself a moment to breathe. Marcus stirred beside him, some color returning to his face. "Alex, I can't believe you pulled that off. How did you—" Alexander clasped his friend's arm. "You would have done the same for me. There was no way I was going to leave you in that hellhole." His expression turned pensive as he watched the distant flashes of the battle receding behind them. But we caught a lucky break with that rebel attack. If they hadn't hit the base when they did... He trailed off, mind churning. The realization that there were elements within Norcadian society opposed to Galen's genocidal crusade presented some intriguing possibilities. He'd have to investigate this crimson knife further. Potential allies against the Norcadians were in short supply after all, and Alexander knew they'd need every advantage they could get after his brazen assault on the prison base. Galen's reprisal would be swift and merciless. Alexander had bloodied the Supreme Commander's nose and deprived him of a prized prisoner. That was a humiliation Galen couldn't let stand. The rescue of Marcus was a victory, but it was sure to provoke an overwhelming response from the Norcadians. Alexander would need to redouble his efforts to build the strength and resilience of the human resistance, and quickly. Alexander's mind raced as he piloted the stolen shuttle away from Galen's command ship. The coordinates of the Norcadian superweapon burned in his mind, a beacon of hope and dread. He glanced at his battered team, their faces grim and bloodied from the firefight. "We're not out of this yet," he said, his voice hoarse. "Galen's already activated the weapon. We have to move fast." The shuttle's engines whined as Alexander pushed them to their limits. Stars streaked by outside the view screen as they hurtled towards their target. Alexander's hands shook on the controls, his body still reeling from the brutal fight with Galen. He could still hear Zoras's final words echoing in his ears. The Norcadian rebel had given his life to give them this chance. Alexander wouldn't let that sacrifice be in vain. "Sir," one of the human techs called out, "I've analyzed the data we stole. The superweapon, it's like nothing we've ever seen before. It harnesses dark energy on a massive scale. If Galen fires that thing at our colonies..." "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance," Alexander cut him off. He turned to address the team. "I know we're battered. I know the odds are stacked against us. But this is it. This is our last shot at saving everything and everyone we've ever known." The ship's sensors pinged as they approached their destination. A massive Norcadian battle station loomed ahead, dripping with weapons. At its heart pulsed an ominous energy signature, the superweapon. "Looks like they've rolled out the welcome mat," Alexander muttered, eyeing the swarms of enemy fighters moving to intercept them. "This is where it gets interesting. Everyone to battle stations. We're going in hot." The shuttle bucked as enemy fire began to pepper their shields. Alexander's hands flew over the controls, juking and weaving to avoid the worst of it. They had one shot at this, one chance to save humanity. As they closed in on the battle station, Alexander set his jaw. Whatever happened next, he'd give everything he had left to stop Galen's mad plan. The fate of his entire species hung in the balance, and Alexander Simmons wasn't about to let humanity down. Alexander's stolen shuttle screamed through space, engines straining as they pushed the craft to its limits. The coordinates of the Norcadian superweapon burned in his mind like a beacon of both hope and dread. His battered team huddled around the central console, faces grim and bloodied from their narrow escape. As they hurtled towards their target, Alexander pored over the stolen data, his eyes widening as he realized the full scope of what they faced. "It's called World Burner," he announced, his voice tight. "An orbital bombardment platform. This thing, it could wipe out our entire species in a matter of days." The gravity of the situation settled over the cramped shuttle like a heavy blanket. Alexander's mind raced, formulating a plan even as exhaustion threatened to overtake him. "Jenna, Tyler, I need you on those command codes. If we can hijack their systems even for a few minutes..." His tech experts nodded grimly, fingers flying over their terminals as they worked to forge false authentication protocols. As they entered the star system housing Worldburner, Alexander laid out his high-stakes endeavor. "Two teams, I'll lead the boarding party. Marcus, you take our remaining ships and hit their defensive fleet. We need one hell of a distraction." The battle erupted in a fury of weapons fire and explosions. Marcus's strike force tore into the Norcadian ships. sowing chaos and drawing attention away from Worldburner itself. Alexander's shuttle slipped through the mayhem, latching onto the superweapon's hull with a resounding clang. "Breaching charges now," Alexander barked. The explosion ripped open Worldburner's outer defenses, and his team poured inside. They fought their way through corridors swarming with security drones, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads. Alexander's rifle barked again and again as they pushed towards the central command nexus. Just as they reached their goal, a massive view screen flickered to life. Galen's sneering face filled the display. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Simmons?" Alexander's blood ran cold as Galen revealed he'd anticipated their move. The false command codes were useless. "I have a special target picked out for Worldburner's first strike," Galen gloated. "Let's see how your precious resistance fares, shall we?" Horror gripped Alexander as he realized what was about to happen. He lunged for the controls, desperate to stop the attack, but it was too late. Worldburner shuddered as it unleashed its hellish barrage. On the monitor, Alexander watched helplessly as the projectiles rained down on the hidden asteroid base. The destruction was absolute, a firestorm that consumed everything in its path. Thousands of lives, civilians, families, snuffed out in an instant. Rage and despair warred within Alexander as Galen's laughter echoed through the chamber. He threw himself at the weapon systems, trying to manually override them, but Galen blocked him at every turn. "You've lost, Simmons," Galen taunted. "In 2 minutes, Worldburner fires again. How many of your people will survive this time, I wonder?" Alexander's mind raced. There was only one option left, insane as it was. "Everyone to the escape pods," he shouted. "Now!" As his team scrambled to obey, Alexander input a new set of coordinates, directly into Worldburner's main firing chamber. The escape pod launched with a violent lurch, rocketing towards the heart of the doomsday weapon. Galen's eyes widened with belated realization, but it was far too late. The pod slammed into Worldburner's cannon at devastating speed. Alexander's world became fire and twisted metal as their improvised explosives detonated. The superweapon tore itself apart from the inside out, a chain reaction that consumed the monstrous creation. Alexander and his surviving team members barely managed to drag themselves into a secondary escape pod, launching away from the disintegrating hulk of Worldburner. Alexander's eyes snapped open as the violent shuddering of his ship subsided. The blinding light of the wormhole faded, replaced by an unfamiliar star field stretching across the view screen. He scrambled to his feet, steadying himself against the bulkhead as he surveyed the chaos on the bridge. A tech officer wiped blood from a gash on his forehead. "Engines are offline, sir. Hull integrity at 62%. Communications array damaged." Alexander limped to the sensor station. "Any sign of the Norcadians?" The officer shook her head. "Negative. No Norcadian signatures detected within range." Relief washed over Alexander, but it was short-lived. He activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is Simmons. We've survived the jump, but we're not out of danger yet. Damage control teams, get to work. I want a full assessment ASAP." He turned to his navigation officer. "Where the hell are we?" The man's fingers flew over his console. "Unknown, sir. These star patterns don't match anything in our database. We're completely off the map." Alexander's mind raced. They'd escaped Galen's onslaught, but at what cost? He keyed the comm again. "This is Simmons to all ships. Report in." One by one, the surviving captains checked in. Each vessel had sustained heavy damage, but they'd made it through. When Marcus's voice crackled over the speaker, Alexander felt a wave of relief. "Alex, you crazy bastard," Marcus said, his voice strained but alive. "I can't believe that worked." "Neither can I," Alexander admitted. "What's your status?" "We're limping, but we'll make it. No sign of pursuit." Alexander nodded grimly. "All right, listen up. We need to regroup and assess our situation. All ships rendezvous at these coordinates." As the battered fleet slowly assembled, Alexander stared out at the alien stars surrounding them. They'd bought themselves time, but at a terrible price. The loss of their hidden base, of so many innocent lives, deeply affected on his conscience. A proximity alert jolted him from his reverie. He spun towards the tactical display, heart racing, but it wasn't Norcadian ships materializing from the wormhole. Instead, the sensors showed the mangled wreckage of Worldburner itself, tumbling through space not far from their position. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Even in its ruined state, the Norcadian superweapon might hold valuable secrets. He opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Simmons. We've got a salvage opportunity. Worldburner's remains came through with us. I want boarding teams prepped and ready. We're going to strip that monstrosity for every scrap of tech we can use." As his crew sprang into action, Alexander allowed himself a moment to breathe. They'd escaped annihilation by the skin of their teeth, flung across the galaxy to parts unknown. But they were alive. And as long as they drew breath, the fight for humanity's survival would continue. He clenched his fists, staring out at the alien vista before them. Whatever challenges this new frontier held, they would face them together. The war was a long way to go. Alexander's eyes scanned the alien cityscape sprawling before him, its towering spires and arching bridges, a stark contrast to the barren desert world they'd just fled. The acrid smoke of their damaged ships mingled with the unfamiliar scents of this urbanized planet. "Sir, we've secured a docking bay," his comms officer reported, "but these aliens, well, they're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat." Alexander nodded grimly. "Understood. Prepare a diplomatic team. We need supplies and we need them now." As they disembarked, Alexander was struck by the eerie silence. No bustling crowds, no signs of commerce or daily life, just rows of armored guards, their faces hidden behind opaque visors. An alien official strode forward, its elongated limbs moving with unsettling grace. "You trespass in sovereign Zekthar space," it intoned through a translation device. "Submit to our authority or face annihilation." Alexander stepped forward, hands raised. "We come in peace, seeking aid. Our fleet—" "Your plight is irrelevant," the alien cut him off. "Surrender or die." Rage boiled in Alexander's gut. After all they'd sacrificed, all they'd endured, to be dismissed so callously. He clenched his fists, mind racing. "Wait," he said, a desperate plan forming. "I invoke the right of Klazoth." The alien official froze, its multifaceted eyes widening. "How do you know of our ancient customs, human?" Alexander silently thanked the xenoanthropology courses he'd taken years ago. One warrior, one duel. The fate of both our peoples hangs in the balance. A tense silence fell over the docking bay. Finally, the alien spoke. "Very well. We accept your challenge. Prepare your champion." Hours later, Alexander stood at the edge of a vast arena, its sand stained with the blood of countless battles. Marcus, battered but defiant, checked the charge on his phase pistol. "You sure about this, boss?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. Alexander clasped his friend's shoulder. "You're the best fighter we've got. I trust you with my life and with all our lives." A deafening roar filled the arena as a massive alien stepped into the ring, its chitinous armor gleaming under harsh spotlights. Marcus took a deep breath and strode forward to meet his opponent. The duel that followed was a blur of searing energy blasts and lightning-fast blade work. Marcus ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding the alien's crushing blows. Blood and sweat stung his eyes as he searched for an opening. Finally, he saw his chance. As the alien lunged forward, Marcus dropped and rolled, coming up behind his opponent. In one fluid motion, he jammed his phase pistol against a gap in the creature's armor and fired. The alien champion crashed to the ground, stunned but alive. A hush fell over the arena. "Yield!" Marcus gasped, his own wounds finally catching up with him. "I claim victory for humanity." The alien overlords conferred briefly, then nodded. "The human has won. We will honor our agreement." As medics rushed to tend to Marcus, Alexander allowed himself a moment of relief. They had a reprieve, however brief, but as he watched his friend being carried away on a stretcher, he knew their ordeal was not nearly finished. The journey home would push them to their limits, but for now they had won a chance to catch their breath, to lick their wounds, and to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead in this vast, uncharted expanse of space. Alexander stood in the command center of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of their fleet's current position. The alien world they'd left behind was now light years away, but the memory of their narrow escape still burned fresh in his mind. A young officer looked up from her console, dark circles under her eyes betraying the exhaustion that plagued them all. Hull integrity at 89%, sir. Life support system stable. We've managed to jury-rig most of the critical systems, but we're running on fumes. Alexander nodded, his lips pursed. The alien overlord's reluctant assistance had given them a fighting chance, but they were far from out of danger. He turned to his chief engineer, who was hunched over a damaged control panel. "How long until we can make another jump?" Alexander asked. The engineer wiped grease-stained hands on his uniform. 2 days minimum. These alien parts don't play nice with our systems. We're having to rewrite half our protocols just to keep the lights on. A proximity alert blared, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Alexander spun towards the tactical display, his heart racing. "Report!" "Sir, it's an Overlord stealth vessel," the sensor officer stammered. "They must have followed us through the wormhole." Alexander banged his head on the console, ignoring the pain that shot through his hand. "Damn it! If they alert their homeworld to our position, we're finished." He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill." He turned to his XO. "Deploy the hunter-killer teams. I want that ship taken out before it can transmit a single byte of data." The next hours were a blur of frantic activity. Alexander paced the bridge, barking orders, as their small corvettes darted through the debris field left by their jump. The stealth ship was living up to its name, using advanced cloaking technology to stay just ahead of their pursuit. Alexander leaned forward, his fist clenched as he gripped the edge of the holotable. "Take the shot." A barrage of energy weapons lanced out from their lead corvette, illuminating the darkness of space. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they'd missed their mark. Then, a brilliant explosion bloomed against the starfield as their target's cloak failed. Cheers erupted across the bridge, but Alexander silenced them with a raised hand. "Confirm kill. I want visual confirmation that ship is space dust." Tense minutes ticked by as their sensors probed the expanding cloud of debris. Finally, his tactical officer nodded. "Confirmed, sir. No life signs detected. The Overlord vessel has been neutralized." Alexander let out a long breath, feeling the weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. They'd avoided disaster, but at what cost? How many more close calls could they survive? He turned to his navigation officer. "Plot a course through this sector. We need to put as much distance between us and that wormhole as possible." As the crew sprang into action, Alexander retreated to his ready room. He pulled up the star maps they'd extracted from the captured Overlord scientist, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere out there, human colonies waited, but the path home would be long and fraught with danger. Alexander zoomed in on a promising cluster of stars, his mind already formulating their next move. They'd survived the Overlords, escaped through an unstable wormhole, and eliminated their pursuers. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew his crew would face them head-on. Alexander's eyes strained as he pored over the alien star charts, his fingers tracing potential routes through the holographic display. The captured data from the Norcadian outpost held the key to their survival, but deciphering it proved a monumental task. Marcus leaned in, squinting at the unfamiliar constellations. "You sure about this, Alex? That's a lot of uncharted space between us and any friendly systems." Alexander nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice. Our supplies won't last forever, and we can't risk another encounter with the Overlords." He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is Simmons. We've plotted a course through unexplored territory. It won't be easy, but it's our best shot at reaching human-controlled space." Alexander divided the fleet, designating the most battle-ready ships as a vanguard force. He took command of the lead vessel himself, leaving the bulk of their civilian population in a heavily armored hulk bringing up the rear. As they pushed deeper into the unknown, the vanguard encountered a rogue pulsar storm. Blinding flashes of electromagnetic energy lashed their shields, overloading systems and sending sparks flying across bridge consoles. "Evasive maneuvers," Alexander shouted over the din of alarms. "Get us out of this maelstrom." The fleet limped through the storm, their hulls scorched and systems flickering. As the last vestiges of the pulsar's fury faded behind them, a faint signal caught their attention. "Sir," the comms officer called out, "I'm picking up a distress beacon. Sir, it's Norcadian." Alexander's pulse quickened. "On screen." The hollow display flickered to life, revealing a battered Norcadian vessel drifting lifelessly among the stars. Initial scans showed no signs of active weapons or life forms. Alexander weighed their options. Or it could be our ticket to some much-needed intel and supplies. "Prep a boarding team. We're going in." The human crew moved cautiously through the derelict ship, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness. Scorch marks and twisted metal told a tale of catastrophic system failures. Deep in the bowels of the engine room, Marcus's scanner began to emit an urgent beep. "Alex, you need to see this." "Not theoretical," Marcus said, his voice tight, "and definitely not stable. If this thing goes critical—" Alexander didn't need him to finish the thought. He keyed his comm. "All teams evacuate immediately. We've got a live bomb on our hands." As klaxons blared, Alexander and Marcus worked feverishly to isolate the reactor core. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as they manually disengaged safety protocols, fighting against systems designed to prevent exactly what they were attempting. "Almost there," Marcus grunted, straining against a stuck valve. With a final heave, it gave way. "Now!" They shoved the violently pulsing core into an escape pod, slamming the launch controls. As they sprinted back to their own ship, Alexander felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet. "Go, go, go," he shouted, diving through the airlock. The human vessels pulled away at maximum thrust, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Norcadian derelict. Seconds later, a blinding flash lit up space behind them. The shockwave buffeted their ships, but they'd escaped the brunt of the blast. As the adrenaline faded, Alexander reviewed the data they'd managed to salvage from the alien vessel. His blood ran cold as he realized the implications. "This wasn't one of Galen's ships," he said softly. "These Norcadians were fleeing from him, just like us." Marcus nodded grimly. "And now we might have just alerted every Norcadian in the sector to our presence." Alexander stared out at the vast unknown expanse before them. They had no choice but to press on, hoping to find allies before their enemies found them. But as he gave the order to resume their journey, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were only beginning. Alexander's eyes snapped open as the escape pod shuddered to a halt. The viewport revealed a landscape that defied logic. Twisted spires of obsidian rock jutted from a ground that seemed to shift and writhe beneath them. In the distance, bloated suns hung motionless in a sky that pulsed with sickly colors. "Marcus, status report," Alexander croaked, his throat raw from screaming during their impossible journey. Marcus fumbled with the pod's controls, his hands shaking. "Systems are fried, boss. We're lucky to be alive." A series of rapid pings echoed through the cramped space. Alexander's heart raced as he recognized the sound of other pods' emergency beacons. "We made it," he breathed. "Some of us, at least." As they popped the hatch, the air that rushed in carried scents that human nostrils were never meant to process. Alexander gagged, forcing down the bile that rose in his throat. "What the hell is this place?" Marcus whispered, his eyes wide as he took in the impassable landscape. Before Alexander could respond, a bone-chilling wail cut through the air. Warning klaxons, their pitch and timbre unlike anything of human design, began to blare from unseen sources. "Move!" Alexander barked, grabbing Marcus by the arm and dragging him towards the nearest structure, a crumbling edifice of angles that hurt the eye to look at directly. As they ran, Alexander's mind raced. The mass anomaly, the gravitational distortions, They hadn't just traveled through space. They'd crossed into another dimension entirely. They reached the dubious shelter of the alien ruin just as the first of the other pods began to crack open. Alexander waved frantically, urging the survivors to join them. "Sir," a young ensign gasped as she stumbled towards them, "what are those things?" Alexander followed her terrified gaze upward. Vast, shadowy forms moved through the twisting sky, their outlines constantly shifting and reforming. As he watched, tendrils of darkness began to coalesce, reaching down towards the scattered human refugees. "Inside now," Alexander roared, shoving his people through a gap in the Cyclopean masonry. The interior of the structure was no less alien than the outside. Walls pulsed with veins of light that hurt to look at, and gravity seemed to shift with each step. "We need to regroup," Alexander said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Check supplies, establish communications." His words were cut off as a thunderous boom shook the very foundations of reality around them. Through gaps in the structure, Alexander saw vast, nightmarish shapes descending from the roiling sky. "My God," Marcus whispered, "what have we done?" Alexander gritted his teeth, his mind racing for a plan, any plan, that might see them through this insanity. But as the monstrous entities of this realm closed in, drawn by the unwelcome presence of beings from another universe, he knew that their trials were only beginning. The alien monoliths loomed before Alexander, their impossible angles twisting reality itself. Tendrils of energy snaked across the fractured sky, painting the void with sickly hues. He blinked hard, willing his mind to process the insanity surrounding them. "Status report," Alexander barked into his comm, fighting to keep his voice steady. Static crackled, then a panicked voice cut through. "Sir, we've got multiple hull breaches. Life support's failing on decks 3 through 7. Before Alexander could respond, the dead sun erupted. A colossal shape burst forth, a nightmarish fusion of bone and metal that defied description. Its surface writhed with alien machinery, scanning the human vessels with incomprehensible energies. "Evasive maneuvers," Alexander shouted, but it was too late. The monstrous entity unleashed a barrage of energy lances. They sliced through the human formation with terrifying ease. Ships disintegrated around him, the screams of the dying cut short as they were vaporized. "Marcus!" Alexander called out, frantically searching for his friend's vessel. "I'm here," Marcus's voice crackled over the comm. "But not for long. We need to get out of here now." Nuclear warheads streaked towards the alien dreadnought, detonating in blinding flashes. The monster shrugged off the assault, advancing relentlessly. Half the surviving fleet managed to slingshot through the distortion. Alexander's ship shuddered as he pushed the engines beyond their limits, covering the retreat. A strangled cry tore from his throat as he watched Marcus's ship, impaled by one of the creature's tendrils. Energy crackled along its length, pulling the vessel apart atom by atom. "Alex!" Marcus's final transmission cut off abruptly. His face, frozen in disbelief, was the last thing Alexander saw before the rift snapped shut. They tumbled through the void between realities, alarms blaring as the ship's systems began to fail. Alexander stared at the readouts in growing horror. The entropy of this place was eating away at their very existence. "Shut down all non-essential systems," he ordered, his voice hollow. "Preserve life support at all costs." Just as hope began to fade, a familiar green light split the darkness. Alexander's blood ran cold as he recognized the hulking shape that tore through the new breach. Galen's flagship, more alien than ever, bled into existence. Its distorted form seemed to scream as it sealed the rift behind it. A cybernetic tendril snaked from the warped bridge, probing the void with malevolent purpose. When it locked onto Alexander's ship, a garbled transmission burst through the speakers. Alexander's hands clenched into fists as he realized the full scope of Galen's madness. The Norcadians' hatred had transcended the laws of physics themselves, driving him to pursue them beyond the boundaries of known space. As Galen's weapons charged, painting streaks of hellish light across the abyss, Alexander felt a cold clarity settle over him. They would face this final battle with every ounce of courage humanity could muster. "All hands," he called out, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his gut. "Prepare for combat. We may die here, but we'll die fighting." The crew responded with grim acknowledgements. Alexander looked out at the cosmic darkness, punctuated by the burning lines of Galen's guns, and steeled himself for what was to come. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.